coming from Sydney, I grew up in a real beach culture. The area that I grew up in, it's all that you really do. I mean, my father was a good surfer. So I was surfing by the time I was 4 or 5 years of age.
You're probably getting stronger, you're getting faster towards this. Maybe there's new goals that are coming afterwards. So it's like the communication process.
When you've got the stakes that are so high, where mistakes are punished sometimes with maybe somebody losing their life, you've got to get it right.
Hello and welcome to the Strength Connection podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kurkowski. I'm so grateful that you can join me today. Mark Ashby is a former elite paratrooper in the Australian Army. He's a leadership coach and the creator of the Waterhole leadership program. His work in leading military teams for 11 years in Iraq taught him some of the toughest and most important lessons on leadership in the most high pressure environments. And he joined me on the show to share these insights with me. So for anyone who's in a leadership or a coaching role, this conversation was filled with great knowledge on what makes a great leader, overcoming toxic cultures, and how leadership has changed over recent times. So if you like this episode, please give it a share, give it a review. Don't forget to subscribe so you can catch all new episodes of the podcast that are dropped every single week. All right, thanks so much, guys. We'll get on with the show now.
Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. And Mark, so nice to meet you. It's nice to finally meet you. I know we've gone back and forth a couple of times, so I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, Michael, it's an absolute joy to be here talking with you on the other side of the world.
Absolutely. I know it's been a little crazy there in Australia for you here. So I'm so happy that we got a chance to dive in. I love following your work. I mean, we're really going to dive into the concept of leadership, which is what you teach a lot from a lot of your experience in the military, being in the elite paratroopers with the Australian Army. And I think everybody who's listening in some ways either has been a leader or at least has had a boss or a leader. So they know the difference between good versus bad. And kind of like we were saying, and kind of even the strength and fitness world, everybody has like their best idea and their philosophy, but it's like coming down to the principles of how to bring a team together on this, I think is so fascinating. So we'll dive into a few cool topics here and get rolling. So yeah. I got to say, like I remember just thinking about this, like I got thrown into leadership way before I ever thought I would in a job. Like I was a personal trainer, just doing my thing. Then all of a sudden my boss at the time called me in and offered me the general manager spot. So overnight now I was this person who was with these people kind of in the trenches every day of working, to now I'm like the one in charge of 12, 15 people, most of which were all older and more experienced than me. And I had no idea what the heck I was doing. And sometimes you learn that way. But leadership, I think, is something that everybody should really understand and know, whether you are a leader or you're looking to be led in ways. I think it's great what you're doing. So I'm excited to chat. Yeah,
fantastic. It's going back to where you were thrust into that position yourself. Your boss obviously saw something in you. That's always, I suppose, a big indicator where you may not think you're ready yourself, but maybe he or she thought there was something new that was ready to go. And you have those you have those qualities. And like you said, I think you're sort of born with it or you're not. Not everybody is a great leader. I've seen many people that wanted to be leaders, and when they get put into that role, it's all of a sudden it's a big shock. It's like, wow, I'm now the boss. I'm now the leader. And it can be a very unnerving situation, and not everybody deals with it well.
Yeah,
it's a really, really interesting concept.
Yeah, one, I think I don't know if I was like the default choice or not at that time, or maybe he saw something. Who knows? Probably, but it is. I think often everybody wants to be a leader, kind of the one of like at the helm. It feels like a very romantic viewpoint. But in reality, as you've seen from your experience, like leadership really comes out in the tough situations and the pressure situations, and even with teams trying to turn around toxic cultures. Like that's when you really see the differences between, the goods and the bads. Like when the pressure situations comes up, that's when you'll see, all right, who's really got this? Who's the one that you want to, lead the charge, and who's the one that maybe needs to sit back and just be part of the crew.
Yeah, well, there's nowhere to hide, is there? Yeah. When you're out in front. When you're in that team environment, to a degree, you can maybe get away with a little bit more as a team member. That when you actually are running that team, depending what size it is, and you're also reporting to somebody else anyway. And like I said, there's nowhere to hide. And it depends if you're in charge then of course of junior people that are really looking up to you, or like for myself, when we were talking previously, when I was private contracting in Iraq, I was put in charge of a group of, real alpha men, very, very experienced operators, all from all specialist backgrounds, different nationalities. And they were very, very good at what they did. They didn't need to be baby. They just needed to be, I suppose, directed. And that was sort of my role there, to really direct those guys and the missions and what we're doing on a daily basis. And once we got past the whole ego side of it, and it actually ended up becoming an amazing experience, and one of the best teams that I've ever led. But it was and like I said before, when you've got the stakes that are so high, where mistakes are punished sometimes with maybe somebody losing their life, you've got to get it right. You can't just go to work on Monday morning after a mistake, say on Friday, have a team meeting and just reset and think, we won't do that again, because maybe one of your mates was killed on Friday.
Right.
And then you've got to then have a couple of days of quick grieving, a lot of reporting. Then they fly, a new bloke in, generally who's recommended, but maybe not. And you've got to get that person up to speed over a couple of days training, and then you're back on mission. And that's how it is. And you've got to have that mindset and that mentality. It's got to be, up there at 100% ready to go. You've got to be ready to go every day. You can't just have a slack day where you think, I just don't want to do this today. It's not like that. You've got to be at your optimum every day.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, thinking about it, I mean, that's as high as stakes as you can possibly get into when you're talking about life or death situations. And I'm sure not everybody is in that role right now, but still you can probably take a lot of those characteristics of leadership from that and apply it, to everything, whether it be business, whether it be, if you're a coach of going in. So it's it doesn't have to exactly be the extreme situations. There's probably a lot of things that you can learn from those situations. You can apply it to anything.
I think it correlates with so many different aspects of life, with business. And like I said, it doesn't matter whether it's corporate or government, like you said, the fitness industry, it doesn't matter. It's just those little lessons you learn, those little characteristics and just professionalism and just being there in your role and trying to get the best out of your people, being that inspirational person, people that, I worked for some incredible leaders in my time overseas, especially. A couple of generals I worked for, and just amazing people that you actually wanted to be like them, and you would have done anything for those people. And I thought that's how I want to be in life. You want to be that person that other people want to be like, and even the legacy they leave behind. Because here I am still sort of talking about them. That they were so amazing what they did, and I think a lot of leaders should really, have a bit of a think about that sometimes, about maybe the legacy they're going to leave behind. Do they want a good one or a bad one? Do they care? But it's a big responsibility to be a leader, especially if you're on a big corporation with thousands of staff. I think a lot of leaders, they really forget where they came from. They forget why they started that journey and why they become so successful in the first place. And it's a lot of time I remind them of that, about remember where you were at the start, and what you did before you came into that big role, and what you were like as a kid. When you're working your first job, and it's quite important to reflect on that, I think.
Yeah. That's so interesting. You think it's there's things like that old cliche of good leaders, they'll create good employees or good team members, but the great leaders, they'll create other great leaders, so it's kind of going in you saw those couple generals who had that experience right off the bat with you. And then you probably just brought that right into all your leadership work that you did afterwards. So to kind of bring this back, Mark, I'd love to kind of kick this off a bit with your experience in the military of getting into this. How did you get kind of into this role? And then when was it that you kind of transitioned into more of the private sector of wanting to teach leadership from these experiences?
It's been quite a journey for me. Coming from Sydney, I grew up in a real beach culture. The area that I grew up in, it's all that you really do. I mean, my father was a good surfer, so I was surfing by the time I was 4 or 5 years of age, and it's just the arena we grew up in here. And so I can't really remember surfing, and it was just my life. Before school, after school, probably 3 times a day on weekends, and then I was competing by the time I was probably 12 or 13. I was doing competitions all the time, and I was in that real competition arena of surfing for many, many years. I even competed overseas a little bit.
Yeah.
over in Europe. But I soon worked out there was no money in it. Back then when I was surfing, it wasn't as professional as what it is now.
Right.
It's a proper tour now. All the boys are all millionaires, but back then everybody was struggling.
Right.
And it was only the top couple of guys that really made careers out of it. And so my father was like, "What are you doing with your life?" You know, in my sort of mid-20s, I'd always had a fascination with the military, especially the sort of more specialised side of the army. We had a very, very famous unit in Australia's history here, which was the paratroopers in Sydney. And like I said, it's got a big reputation, you know, hard, not easy to get into. But that's what I set my goal on. And I joined up the army, went through my basic training like everybody else does, and then did my sort of tryouts for that. And lucky enough to get in and become part of that amazing unit. And I did a couple of tours of East Timor with that unit, which was an amazing time. And the big thing I suppose that really struck me with that level of soldiering was the fitness, was what was expected of you.
Okay.
You weren't babied and told what to do. A lot of it was sort of, I suppose, on you with your peers. But at that level of fitness, it was just expected every day. And once you get to that certain level of fitness and you maintain it, it's such an amazing feeling. You almost feel bulletproof, really.
Yeah.
Because your body's so in tune, and you get looked after. You get fed the right food, and you have these amazing facilities, gyms and swimming pools, and it was a really amazing time. And I loved my time there. But when the whole transition with the Twin Towers coming down, obviously New York was such a big occasion for you all, and I can't really grasp that. But it also affected the rest of, I suppose, the Western world in a way, and it affected us because we knew we were going to be involved in it somehow straight away.
Yeah,
we've been with the US since parts of World War I onwards, and amazing history there together. And we all, like all, I suppose, specialist soldiers, elite soldiers, we all want to be part of it when it goes on.
Okay.
And they were mucking us around and telling us we were going and not going and back and forth, and we all want to go. It's like playing football or baseball or anything. You don't want to be on the bench. You want to play. You want to go.
Right.
And so in the end, I got offered a role to go over as a private contractor to Iraq in 2004, just after the war had started. And I jumped at the chance, not really knowing what I was doing. And to be honest with you, it was when we landed, I was on the first plane load of Australian ex-soldiers to be flown into Baghdad, as private guys. I was the first guy. I was one of the first plane loads. And it was such a shock to us all. It was, East Timor was like a more of a peacekeeping style mission. We literally, I didn't fire one round over there in all my time over there. We were chasing ghosts most of the time. Iraq was in front of your face. It was there day one. It was unbelievable. Just the noise and the smell and how volatile it was. It was just insane. And really? I think a lot of us were, it was far worse than I think we all imagined. And we were so shocked, and quite a few blokes didn't last. They actually went home after a week or two. It was so bad. I think for once the media was actually downplaying it. Normally the media plays everything.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I think they were downplaying how bad it was. It was horrendous. And they worked out, because I was attached to the US over there, and they worked out that we had a 7% chance of losing our life every day, 7%. And that was the sort of statistic it was. So when you talk about mindsets and what that does to you, to you mentally, it's very fatiguing. And especially when you're a team leader and you're running teams and you've got those soldiers under your responsibility, or your ex-soldiers, it really is a massive thing, because it's that realization that you are now leading these guys into this combat zone,
right?
And you want to get them all home safely. And it's such a huge responsibility, because maybe you get to know these people, and you get to know, maybe who their kids are and how their families work. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, but you become like brothers. You have to be.
Absolutely.
Because you're living in these tight confines, and it's so dangerous every single day for months on end. And I've never felt pressure like it, to be honest, of having that overwhelming responsibility of people's safety in your hands.
Yeah. Did that pressure, does that kind of feel like it's almost overwhelming, or does it kind of almost lock you in even more, almost into like a flow state immediately. Did you feel kind of one push, like one way versus another?
At first, yes. At first,
Mm-hmm.
I was really overwhelmed by it,
Mm-hmm.
and just the realization that you don't want to be responsible for somebody's death,
Right.
and I think I was trying to do it all as well. I was trying to take everything on with my missions, planning the missions and
Mm-hmm.
the delivery, and I was trying to do everything. And I had a wake up call where I was going home, and I was on a flight, and I was so exhausted. I got up in the night time to sort of get up to go to the bathroom, and I just piled in. I just fainted or collapsed or something on the plane.
Mm.
Woke up in the aisle with and with a couple of people saying you okay, and I was just like, wow. And it was a real wake up call to me of like, okay, I've got to really take a back step to this and really reassess. And I then started utilizing the guys a lot more to help me out with mission planning and it was the best thing I ever did. To really, it wasn't I didn't trust them before. I was just trying to do it all on my own.
Yeah. Was that something you feel like you were trying to like just hold on to control of everything because you were just afraid that if anything kind of just just left your eyesight for a minute, that it might fall apart? Was that kind of the thought process behind it?
It wasn't for me about control. I've never been a controlling person. It was more about the worry of just getting it wrong.
Mm.
That was the big thing for me. It was just, I thought if I do it all myself, I know that it'll be done my way, and that will work. But in hindsight, that I worked out that it actually wasn't the best way, and actually things improved. They got better when I started utilising all the guys around me with their expertise. Mm-hmm. And like I said, they were a great bunch of guys, and so professional, and they made my life easy in the end. It ended up becoming this amazing. It was like a machine that just went along every day, and true professionals. So yeah, it was an incredible time.
Yeah. So when you're over there, you kind of mentioned like that brotherhood almost comes together right away. But I'm sure there's probably some times too when a bunch of people just aren't on the same page as well of kind of getting in. If you have new people come in, trying to pick them up to speed, and everybody's expecting things from them. Did you have any struggles at all during that time of kind of getting the camaraderie to come together at all?
Yeah, funny you say that. Look, I was put in charge of another team. That team was so successful, the first one, that after a couple of years, my boss pulled me aside and he said, "Mark, I've got a team I'd like you to take on in another city." It's basically a team that was half paratroopers and half Royal Marine Commandos. So there's a British-based team, British guys, and they those two units, they don't like each other. There's a lot of we're talking families join these units through generations.
Okay,
we're going back in wars, and they hate. There's a real disregard there for each other. So when I got asked to take them on, and it was so toxic. I was really concerned. I was like, "Oh, do I really want to do this?" My boss was like, "No, I want you to do this. I think you'll be okay." So I basically took them on, and I started by getting all the boys individually aside, and almost like an interview process, really. And I told them all, if I can't pull this team together within a couple of months, you're all going to be sacked. You're going to lose your incredibly high-paying, tax-free job and be sent home. And I just go to another part of the organisation. But I soon worked out that the actual problem was the old team leader was taking favourites in the team, and he was creating this division in the team, and it was so toxic. And there was a couple of punch-ups went on, and but in the end, they end up gelling together. And like I said, true testament to those guys, how professional they were, and ended up probably becoming the best team that I ever ran in the end. How close we became. Mm-hmm. I brought a 2IC in who was my 2IC. So the two of us together, and instead of going there and imposing our will and telling them how it was going to be, we just we basically showed them, I suppose, what it could become,
right,
through our own actions of what was in front of them and what the potential was, and that we actually believed in these guys, and instead of belittling them. And look, I'm still friends with those guys to this day, and I always saw that as a real test of success, because I saw so many team leaders over there who failed in that environment, and they just weren't right for it. They tried to really, really thrust their, I suppose, too much of a grip over the team. They really tried to dominate it, and they just failed horribly, and they don't have any communication with their guys to this day. And I always saw that as a bit of a a bit of a sort of, a bit of a guide to how things were going to go in the future.
Right.
It
That's
was yeah, such a high pressure environment, and it either worked or it didn't. There was no real middle ground.
right. That's
Yeah.
so interesting because kind of as a civilian, you almost think like, okay, you're in this high stakes environment and you're a team, you would just naturally come together, to work. But these two groups they had such lineages, over history of, how they thought, and they didn't like each other, regardless of what the situation was like. So it seems like probably a pretty common mistake for a lot of people. They might just go in and think, oh, I can just overpower these, and like, this is what has to happen. Otherwise you're all out of here. When what you did is more like get them to share in the vision of what they're trying to do together. That seemed like that was more of the approach that you took.
Yeah, you just using their strengths. And I have a part of my course I call it individual brilliance, where everybody has that little bit of individual brilliance, and it's about unpacking that and finding out what that person's good at. Because we're not all good at everything. Some people are much stronger in certain areas. Maybe somebody's really strong in IT or in cyber or HR or logistics, and you've got to find that bit of a spark there. And it was exactly the same for this team. It's to really get the best out of them. And it's like I said, it's when the danger's so big and so real. This is why you get also people speaking out a lot more, because they're so concerned for their safety. They're like, no, we don't want to. We're going this particular, route to a location tomorrow. No, we don't want to go that way. We think it's wrong, And if the team leader's a guy that may say, okay, let's sit back and say, why do you think that? Like, I was very open like that. I'd be like, okay, guys, why aren't you happy with this? And I'd listen to what they had to say, and I'd say, maybe you guys are right. Let's try that. Not always, but sometimes, that you may have that opinion coming in. That's a good opinion, and you've got to listen. Sometimes you can't just always think you know everything as a leader, because you may have some incredible people below you.
That's interesting, because you mentioned they're like listening and like trying that out. Like, is that one of the main mistakes that you maybe see from people that you've worked with in leadership, of like thinking you can overpower and like kind of give these demands and you're the one that's calling the shots, when in reality, it seems like oftentimes the best way to approach that is to kind of speak last, like kind of listen to what the people are saying first and kind of bring them together that way?
I think if you don't listen and you have poor communication inside of a company, you're really inhibiting your own business or company, because you're only using a certain percentage of it. It's almost like, come to work, do your job, Monday to Friday, shut up and do your role, and then go home. If you allow them to have some sort of input, whether you have weekly suggestion meetings or whatever it is, how you run your own business, at least give yourself, as a leader or the boss or the CEO, the opportunity to get more out of the business. And like I said, not everybody's going to be perfect in any role, but at least give it that chance, and that opportunity for those people to shine. And I've found more often than not, when I'm involved in a company that I'm trying to help out, that it works. Communication is key. And there's so many companies out there that do not communicate with each other, don't communicate with their staff.
Yes.
And I'm like, why don't you talk to your staff? What are you scared of? Because I'm not one of those people who is scared to go to the CEO. I don't care if you're earning, $50 million a year, or if you're the janitor. I don't care. The environment we were brought up in, we're like that. We're not going to be intimidated by somebody's success. We're going to respect it, absolutely.
Right.
And I'm going to respect that person, but I'm not going to go there and bow down to them and go, oh, you're incredible, you earn $50 million a year, because I've done things that they haven't done, and vice versa. So we've all got our strengths and weaknesses. But once they realise that I'm there to help them, I'm there to stand by their side and get them through either a crisis or just to make them a better version of themselves. Yeah. And as I say to them, you've got this incredible workforce here, these incredible people. You've got to look after them and trust them, and it's going to benefit you and your company.
Yeah,
it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, that concept you mentioned, Mark, of the individual brilliance, I think that's so interesting, and kind of bringing that thread of communication in there as well. Is it something where you think a lot of people or a lot of leaders, they do that once and then think like that's enough, and they don't continuously practice it down the line. This is something that I talked a lot about with some coaches about goal setting, where like people come in and we talk about the goal of what the client has, but you only do it the first day and then you just start executing it and you stop talking about it afterwards. Well, it's like, if you don't continuously talk about it, first, it might change as it goes on. But second, you also are not knowing whether you're measuring. You're probably getting stronger. You're getting faster towards this. Maybe there's new goals that are coming afterwards. So it's like the communication process, it needs to be more of a constant rather than just like an activity that you do.
Yeah, I mean, we're all habitual creatures, humans. We don't like change. We like being comfortable in what we do, and we do things a certain way. It can be anything, and from food to what we do in our daily lives, how we eat. We like what we have every day. And for some people, for change or for quite big change, yeah, it's a shock, and they just go back to their old ways, their old habits. And like you said, it's a really I suppose important thing that you brought up about that, where people will change for maybe I see it where people may change in a business for a week or two, maybe for a month, and then the old habits slowly start creeping back in again. And of course, when I work with a company, I just don't say goodbye. I always, might pop back in there or check up or what's going on, because you want them to thrive, and you want them to not be back to where they were. Especially when I work with individuals, I work with a lot of individual executives, from the sort of board up, basically the board up in that C-suite environment up to the CEO, and they can be the worst for it. They all think they're right. They all think they're the best. And,
really?
Yeah. It's a very alpha environment, male and female. And the change for them, I think, is like, well, I'm important. I'm on the board and I wear my flash suit and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but you're just making life hard for yourself. You're just doing it the wrong way. And sometimes the changes can be very subtle. They can be really a 5% change, 10% change in mindset, in structure, what they're doing, to help them get the best out of themselves. And I suppose I base a lot of my teachings off my experience, and I base it off lessons that we learnt by trial and error, by making mistakes, by working under those extreme environments, under pressure, and how we got the best out of ourselves. So it's not that it's something you can't learn by doing an 8-hour masterclass. These leadership masterclasses and taught by other corporates, and it's like, I don't really understand what you're going to learn in an 8-hour leadership class, taught by somebody else who's basically just your peer in your same industry. It's an interesting one, like what you come up against. I meet a lot of other leaders in my process, in my work, that have, I suppose, done 5 to 10 years in corporate, and they're going to think they're at the same, I suppose, level of experience of where I come from. And it's like and you don't want to be insultive because they've worked hard on their own careers. But if you talk about true leadership, and leadership, like I said, under pressure, under those environments, and what it's like to actually, have to achieve that level of professionalism every day, I sort of find it hard to compare the two.
Right. How much, like, for those that are like those executives that they're just kind of struggling in their own, I guess, ego is the best way that I can say, and kind of get out of that. What's your advice or your process of working with somebody like that? Is it focusing on their own mindset, like first, and kind of recovering from maybe some of the stuff and like unlearning some of those things? Or like, how do you go about working with somebody like that? Yeah,
it can be a challenge. I'd say generally, more often than not, they're going to be more on the stubborn side of things than not, because they don't want somebody coming in and telling them that they have a problem, even though they've got in contact with you or they've been referred to you, because they do have one. I find sometimes it can be, I generally sit back with my first session with a person and just let them talk. I really just want to understand who they are, where they come from, a bit of their personal life as well, because sometimes the problem may not be work related. It's personal. Maybe they're going through a bad divorce, maybe like a custody battle with their children. Maybe they've had a death of a loved one, and that's then being reflective at work. And I've seen this on a lot of occasions, and they're taking it out on their staff. They're not being as professional. And it's about them really taking a step back, and it's got to be a paradigm shift with them. You've got to make them understand that the road they're going on is actually the wrong one. And once you can have that little bit of a light bulb moment with them and really, really, like I said, flip that paradigm, then it starts to come together.
Yeah. I remember one of the coaches that I worked with for a long time. She's amazing. She was a client first of us, and she was telling, me everything that she was doing before. And she was like overtraining in many, many different ways. And the one question I said is like, okay, how's that working for you? And she said it was the first time anybody asked her to actually like what that was, and realized like, actually, it's not working at all. You're just in a routine of doing it over and over again. And it seems like regardless of who you are, like especially if like people like you're explaining, they've built success from doing this for a while, but now all of a sudden the same pattern and same thing they're doing is not giving them the same results anymore. They're in a different space in their life. And that seems like that can be one of the toughest things for people to recognize that, yeah, what you did maybe 5 years ago that got you the initial success is not the same thing that's going to help you keep moving forward in more of a leadership role.
Oh yeah. And I challenge them. Do you want to be good? Do you want to be great, or do you want to be extraordinary? Do you want to be seen as a leader in your industry? Because I'd say to them right now, you're not at that level. Can you be there? Absolutely, you can be there. And it really is that it's that challenge, and I really help them to understand. And it's something that I've found out that I've discovered that I'm good at is turning complex into simple. Really making complex situations that people make complex themselves, and really making it simple and understandable for them, for their staff, and it's giving them actual time back in their lives. And I say the same thing to them. Are you happy? And I never have them in their own work environment. I always get them out of there. I don't want to be in your work environment. I'll meet them the first time if they like. If it's really crucial for me to meet them in their office for the first conversation we have. But after that, it's like, we're not staying here. Let's get out, and we go to either for a walk, or we go to find a cafe where we can have a nice chat. Sydney's got some great spots down in the harbour and things. Just get out and actually really come down to that human level, because we've all got insecurities, Michael. Every one of us as human beings, we all have our own little issues. It doesn't matter how successful you are. We've all got them. And it's about, I suppose, unpacking that person's insecurities and to help them then to go forward and be the best version of themselves.
Right. Yeah. And being in that workspace, probably it's very easy to mask those insecurities because you're in your own zone of doing everything that you're normal at. So just first thing is just get out of that environment, right? Just change
and distractions there. They'll be like there on their phone, or somebody's coming past and can I talk to you for a second? So when we go out, it's like, right, phone off. It's just you and me for an hour or a couple of hours. Yeah. And let's just go out and talk. And I share a lot of my own experiences, because they're experiences that really are going to be helpful to that person moving forward, and that their results. It's got to be result driven. It's got to be outcome driven. There's got to be an outcome that they want to be at, where they want to arrive at. And that's really important. And I found a few other coaches that I've worked with in my similar industry, they're not outcome driven. They're just going through the cookie cutter leadership programs without really knowing that it's not about them. It's about the person they're actually looking after,
Right.
And you really want to get to a point where that person actually arrives. They arrive at a destination.
Yeah. Have you found, is it a struggles often with people? Like when you ask, like, kind of what's the goal, what's the outcome you want? Do they have that answer often? Or does it seem like often like they're just almost stuck in the hamster wheel of just doing stuff and they don't even actually know what it is that they want?
Yeah, you can get like that. And then you've got to have a hard conversation with that person. And it's got to be like, I want to help you. If you don't want my help, if you're not quite ready to be at that level, then maybe we should not work together right now. And I really will say it to them. And they'll either, majority of them will go in a bit of a panic mode, and actually then maybe change their ways a bit. And I'm not scared to have that conversation. If it's not right, if the time isn't right to work with that person, then I'll walk away.
Mhm.
and ask them, maybe you need to come back in 6 months' time when you're ready. I found I'm pretty good at getting into somebody's, I suppose, trust zone.
Mhm.
I've found that I've got a bit of a knack for doing that. And so that's the least of my worries, because I can really go in there and really resonate with them and understand what they're going through. And like I said, we've all been through bad experiences. I went through a very bad divorce myself. During that, my father died at the same time, and it was a very tough time for me. So, I understand that people go through tough times.
Yeah.
But you've got to want to help yourself to get out of it. Me as a coach or high performance coach, you're not there to baby someone and to rescue them. You're there to help them.
Yeah.
Sort of, you're not helping them swim out of the harbour. You're actually giving them the actual device to actually help themselves get out of it, and showing them how to do that. It's like a bit of a guide.
Yeah. Do you share a lot of your personal kind of stories with people when you talk to them, kind of getting them onboarded in your programming?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think with me, I sort of have to. It'd almost be negligent in a way to not do it, because of that, with that person. And it's something that I enjoy doing. I don't go into too much of the nitty gritty, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's what would be a bit graphic for somebody.
Right. Yeah. I think it's so
but-
important. It's so important though, right? Especially as somebody who's trying to consult or coach, on that. Luca Huckoverites had a great line: "Is your mess is your message," to people. And it seems like so often with people, like, we're struggling, we get overwhelmed. It's very easy to think that you're the only one that's dealing with that, not realizing that the coaches, even the people that are going to help you, they've gone through shit, or they've gone through their own stuff before. And sometimes just connecting on that, right? It just brings the wall down a little bit more, that you can actually open up to a conversation like this.
Oh yeah, when I first started the business, I worked with a lady, great lady in Australia. Her name's Mary Henderson. She's a branding coach, been in corporate for a long time in business, and very, very successful. And she sort of told me very early on, no matter what you do, Mark, in this industry, because you've got to remain yourself. You've got to be authentic. Don't you dare change who you are and your experiences, because you will be unique in your field. You're going to be in that little small percentage of people who are coaches or high performance coaches that actually have a unique background.
Yeah.
You don't come from our industry, from corporate, or from government, whatever it is. So it was a really great message. And so I decided very, very early on that I won't sort of, I suppose, change that way for anybody. That I'll remain authentic, and a lot of that authenticness comes from my background. It comes from what I've done and those hard years, because in reality, elite soldering and that, it's not like the movies. It's hard work.
Yeah.
It's years and years of dedication and training and hard work and working injured. I mean, all of us were injured when we were on missions overseas, because our mission tempo was so high. We couldn't afford to just have a week off or 2 weeks off, or all of us were injured.
Yeah. Well, and I assume too, like, the physical side of it, of actually going into missions, is one thing, but probably just the mental exhaustion of just waiting for it and preparing for all these things, that can weigh on you probably just as much as actually going in and getting the jobs done.
Oh yeah, especially if you're going to a really bad part of town, or out in one of the provinces that is a bad place, and the chances of you being targeted or ambushed or blown up is very, very high. And it plays in your mind. Of course it does. You might have a mission one day, it's not too bad, and you're like, okay, but in your mind, in 2 days' time, you're going to that bad part of town where the last time you were there, maybe you involved in a roadside bomb, or you got targeted by an ambush. Yeah. And the guys themselves, we all talk. It's like, we're off to maybe we're going out to Fallujah. I'm sure you've heard of Fallujah before.
Yep.
And it's like, maybe going out to Fallujah tomorrow. And it's that nervous energy. You're like, it's coming. And we have a saying. I sit on the radio. I'm always talking on the radio. And as we're coming into the city, I just get on the radio and say to the boys, we're in it. We're in it now. And it was that's that mental switch on. Yeah. We're in it. We're in the jungle now. And it's something it's hard to explain to people, but it's you either are going to absolutely fail in that environment and sink, or you're going to thrive, and you have to be better than your opposition. You've got to believe you're better, and it's like that with a lot of the elite guys. Doesn't matter if like my old unit or the Delta guys or the SEALs or your Green Berets or your Rangers. It doesn't matter. They're all the same mentality guys. They've all believed that they are better than their opposition.
Right.
You have to
believe that. Yeah.
It's not an arrogance. It's not an arrogance. It's just you've just something you've got. It's self-belief, like an elite sportsman, that you are better.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if it's like playing on your heels, versus up on your toes, I'm sure. Can that get better at all, Mark? Like with experience with it? Like, I mean, I'm sure it's like it's a fight or flight situation, I'm sure, when you're in it from there. But can that actually be almost learned to get better in that situation at all?
I think what you learn is not to aim for peak. And when I say peak, like we can look at like a sportsman, not to aim for peak fitness, is to aim for that optimum fitness where you can remain optimum at that level every single day. You look at someone like Michael Jordan, for all those years that he was so dominant. He could have probably been even at a high level, but he was so consistent at that level for so many years, and he operated at that optimum level. He looked after his body, and that's why he became, probably the greatest person to ever play that sport, because he was so incredible. It was like Kelly in the surfing. I'm sure you heard of Kelly Slater. Oh yeah, Kelly was like that. Kelly was, and I got to see and surf with Kelly and those guys for many years, but Kelly was at a different level. He could just surf so consistently every single day. It was incredible. And you might have days where you could be as good as him on that day, maybe, but he was like that. He was like that every day, just that, and optimal performance and fitness every single time. And a lot of that's looking after yourself mentally, physically, diet, all those things, which he did incredibly well. And that's why he was so good for decades. And but you learn as you go along. You learn from your mistakes. You learn how to get better as you get a bit older. I think that I was my best when I was in my, I suppose, mid-30s. That was my optimum level of fitness and mentality, and even into my 40s. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good question.
It's interesting with I was a big Kelly Slater fan growing up, and he was one of the first ones that I heard about, like that kind of stoic look on his face. Like when he would go into the water, like there didn't look like any emotions. He was going out to like 100-foot waves, and it just looked like he was going for, a stroll in the lake, of just going down there, of like managing those emotions. And I think that's such a thing about optimal, versus peak, like that. I like how you said that there, because oftentimes you can think of a guy like Michael Jordan, and he wasn't burning out like pedal to the metal of adrenaline. It was just optimal. This is where I need to be to get there. And then you state regulate, from there. And I think that's a lesson that we can all really learn when we're doing stuff. Because if you're in strength, if you're an entrepreneur, whatever you're doing, if you're a leader, like it's going to be a day by day basis, like find that optimal without trying to push. And I think that's a lot of mistake. I made that mistake as a leader, thinking I needed to be like over the top cheerleader and push people to get to that level. When in reality, I was just burning energy. Like they weren't taking anything from me. I was just kind of burning myself out more than anything.
Yeah. And that's the key. And I think you get some sportsmen though, or even in business, where they actually push themselves so hard that they burn out and they never recover. They're never the same. They have all this potential, and maybe they're a bit of a prodigy in that sport. And they just, like I said, they never recover. They never become that same version where the real elite ones, they learn what their level is, and they think, yep, if I do this at this level, I'm at, whether it's 90%, I don't know what the percentage is, what optimum is, but it's very, very easy to see.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Wanted to ask you about like people in leadership. There's the term that people say, oh, he's a naturally born leader, or he's just naturally such a gifted leader or so. But it's like anything, there could be a learned skill from there. Like, have you seen people that you work with in the military or so? Like, do you think like leadership is something that some people naturally have more, or is it something that you can really learn just like any skill?
I think what a lot of those people are, they're people that are maybe quite confident in life. You might get those people even when you're at high school or when you're quite young, and they're quite outspoken and confident, and they just have that bit of an aura about them. And those people, I think, either go on to be totally obnoxious that everyone can't stand, or they go on to be, you put them in a leadership role and they thrive. And I had two generals overseas, like these two I spoke about before. One of them was a big booming character, but he was an amazing man. And, led by example. I had another one that was a bit of a quieter general. And he also led from the front, but he had this incredible aura about him. And he was pretty quiet and reserved, but the way he carried himself and how he spoke to you, how respectful he was. And he'd want to know about your family, about your kids, about things like that back home. And I'd get a knock on my door. He'd come around and have coffee with me, this guy. And that just doesn't happen. And the respect you develop with him and the friendship I developed with him was just amazing. And really taught me how to juggle professionalism and sort of empathy in that same sort of sphere. He said to me, it's not just about aggression, Mark. We're just not about, doing what we do every day. You've got to be able to flick that switch and go from extreme aggression to that empathetic side, where maybe we're dealing one day in a village with kids around and we're kicking a soccer ball or a football around. And this is what we were doing overseas too. One day it was in the absolute middle of it, in the rubbish. The next day you may be in a friendly village. Yeah. And it was a great example that I've now kept going through life. And so I think that it's hard, isn't it? Like, who constitutes a good leader? I think it's just results based, and it can only be something you can sort of see through time. It's not something you'll see in a couple of weeks. It's got to be maybe over a year or two, where that person becomes comfortable, and then you really see where their leadership goes, whether they abuse their power or they become an empire builder and start building their empire with all their own people and nepotism and things, or whether they're like actually get better and you're like, wow, this person's amazing. But I don't think there's a lot of them around. I think they're few and far between.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think often people think like a leader and they put like a character out there, like a personality. And like you said, like the two different generals, one very booming personality, another one kind of more quiet and reserved. And it's like, I think it comes down to, probably trust and authenticity. If you trust somebody, obviously you're going to follow them a lot more. I remember, I loved history in World War II and Captain Winters from Band of Brothers, and that whole story. And he was such a quiet, calm guy. I think he was like a Quaker or something like that too. They were saying it's like, but the guys trusted him so much, to go through it. And obviously you need to perform when the time comes. That's a big thing too, is have the resume that you build up. But it's, I think if people are getting into leadership, like you don't need to adopt a character and adopt a personality, like be your own self, be what's authentic, and then kind of apply these other traits.
Yeah, well, you'd hope that that person has been put there because of their hard work and their skill set and their ability to lead people. That's what it's all about. It's about, you're I suppose delegating, but you're also using other people's strengths around you to help the business shine. It's I think too many people that they confuse the situation, and it's not rocket science. It's just like I said about utilizing everyone around you to help the company keep progressing. And I see it so often where it's like you're just making life hard for yourself. You're just doing this the hard way. Why not make life easier? You don't have to be working. It's like that masculine versus feminine mentality. Now, when I say that, I mean, and I teach this a bit in my business, it's the whole masculine approach to business or work is to work 80 hours a week. It's to work this crazy, and I say to those people, you're working how many hours a week? You have to be burnt out. What about your family life? Do you see your children? Like, come on. Where the feminine way of doing things is more of a lateral way, that they work, women and generally work smarter than men, that they can juggle more things at once, where men are more directional, straight down the line. And that's an approach I take in that whole masculine versus feminine approach in business. And it's really amazing, the results.
Yeah. It is. It's like, it's different energies that like everybody has in there. It's like, I've kind of played on both ends of the energy of there. I've worked the 80 hours a week, before and done, that piece, and then kind of worked the other where it's a lot more lateral now of being my own, my own boss and stuff. But What's interesting too, like you said, it's like with the people who get into leadership often are the ones that are the best at the job. It seems like the people that like that middle management type work, especially here in the States, like that's one of the most challenging pieces of leadership for people. Because often it's like you're the best one at the job that now you're leading, but nobody ever told you actually how to lead these people before. It's like you might just be the best salesman, but now you're like you're in charge of actually working with the salesman underneath you and actually teaching them and cultivating them. Have you worked with a lot of people kind of in that role? Like you're not the boss, but you're kind of in that middle road?
Yeah, I think of that middle road too. It's a bit of a war zone, isn't it? Sometimes.
Oh gosh, yeah.
It's a dog eat dog world in there.
Yeah.
And you are very right when you say that they may be amazing at what they do, but when it comes to actually leading people, yes, this is where they're going to suffer.
Yeah.
And I think they because a lot of them are running, and I want to be careful how I say this, but they're running their own, I suppose, leadership courses inside of these corporations, but they're only run by managers inside of that business. They're not run by the actual leaders of I suppose, of the firms. And I suppose that's why the smart ones will use actual people that have actually been in proper leadership roles to run them, or get external people in to maybe run a course like myself. I think when you start having this big middle management leadership teams and you expect to get amazing results out of it, it's a recipe for disaster. And
yeah,
I was speaking to a lady just the other day. She's a friend of mine that's her exact role. And she said to me, I'm doing a bit of mentoring with her. And she said, I don't understand, Mark, why I'm running these leadership courses and I can't get them to listen to me. And there's division and there's arguing. And I said, because you work for that organization, you're part of the framework, and that respect level is not going to be the same. And you're not somebody from the outside who's coming in. They're like, okay, we've got somebody here who's a specialist in their field. We're going to listen. And there's that respect level. When it's somebody who actually works there, it can be a really contentious sort of attitude towards that. Maybe even a little bit of bitterness or jealousy that that person's got that role. And I said, this is the reason. It's always that risky element when you have, I suppose, people training their own people in leadership.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's just more about becoming, I suppose, proficient in their roles in that business, but not about leadership itself. I think they missed the mark a bit with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, I feel for people in middle management. It's like you kind of have this power, but you don't really have any hammer. And like oftentimes like you need that absolute power in some ways if you're going to, or at least like the opportunity of it. Maybe you don't utilize it enough, but I feel for people in management. I've been there myself and stuff. And I think it can often be, very challenging, for people, but like everything, I think it can be learned, but it seems like one of the terms and things that you said a lot here, Mark, was like empathy, and just having empathy. And I think that comes back to listening. And I think in any type of coaching realm, I think if you become a really good listener on this, you're going to probably find the right solutions of what you need. Like it's not going to be a linear progression track, but you're going to find the information of what you need in order to help the person that you're either hired or you're trying to help.
You've got to be a listener and you've got to be understanding. And I think for all leaders moving forward in the future, especially in big corporate, they're going to have to be that way. They're going to have to listen to their staff. They're going to have to be understanding. They're going to have to be somebody who can pivot, who embraces technology as well, and who can really adapt moving forward, because there's going to be a lot of changes going forward, especially after COVID. I think we've seen a gigantic shift in business and the way things are moving. And what I'm seeing now, years ago when somebody wasn't happy in a role, say there's somebody in middle management, they would just, either leave that job or look for another job, and they'd take that and off they go. I've now found people are living now in teams, and this is the new trend, and it's scary. I had one lady, she was that I worked with, and she was in tears with me on the phone because she had 16 of her team leave one day, just quit on the spot, no warning. Just said, we're leaving for another organisation, 16 of us. And she was like, what do I do? How do I replace that? And I didn't even have a quick answer for her, because it's like, wow, what do you do? That's unbelievable. And it's like I said, you've got to have this. So, and a lot of people, the younger generation are coming now as well. They're educated. They know what they want. They know how business works. I look at myself at the same age, and I had no idea what I was doing. And now they're just, they're so full on, and they know what they can ask for. A lot of them come now in with demands. They're going to look at what the business can offer them in packages. Do you have a gym package and a food package here? Child minding, all these things now that they're looking at. What are the benefits for me? And because I'll say, look, this organisations can give me this, so can you give me more? And sometimes it's not even about the money. The money's great, of course, already making good money, but it's also about the benefits come with that role. Well, we never had you never had things like that when we were, in the 80s and even the 90s, and things are a lot different now. There's a lot more competition. Yeah. And it's going to be very interesting to see how it morphs in the next sort of few years after COVID has really run its course.
Yeah. So and I think that's the question I'd love to kind of close this out with. Like, in your experience from the military, in your business of consulting with leaders and stuff, how have you seen leadership change from kind of when you first got started as much into now? Like, is there different questions that like people need to ask people who maybe they're going to hire, they're going to work with, or so? Like, how is that whole process of leadership have you seen changed?
Well, I think the days of the male dominated boardroom environment and that has taken definitely a big shift. There's a lot more females now in senior roles. And for me personally, I just want the best person in that role, male or female. I really don't care. I've worked with some great female leaders. I looked after a female ambassador for 4 years in the Australian Embassy in Baghdad, and a great lady, unbelievable. So it's about that adaptive and that really understanding culture moving forward. And I think that a lot of the kids coming in now, they're prepared. They're prepared for their interviews. They're all educated and they know what they want. So leaders are going to have to be really almost not like I'm giving you the job, almost a bit of a shift where we'd love for you to come here and really understand they can't muck people around anymore. When I was looking at maybe starting my own business, I was finishing university or working for somebody. I actually did a couple of interviews with a couple of the big firms in Sydney as like a risk consultant style firm. And they just mucked me around, like I couldn't believe it. And, interview after interview and ambiguous and no answers. And we want you, but we don't. And in the end, I just said to one of them, I said, this is why you're having so much trouble getting the right person, because you're just mucking people around. And that was the real catalyst for me starting my business. In the end, it was just like, I've had enough of this. I don't want to work for anybody anymore. I'm gonna go in there. I don't want to be your employee. I'm going to come in as a consultant and charge you accordingly. Right. And but they just couldn't grasp it. And I keep seeing that same position advertised for months and months afterwards. It was really funny. And I think a lot of leaders have really got to get their heads around this now. Or if they don't adapt, they're going to fail. So I get on that ship that's sailing away, but it's going to a good destination, not a bad one. It's actually going to a good place. Jump on board, or you're going to be left on that island and you'll be left there without a paddle. And it's something that's it's I think for a few of them it's a real conundrum because they're stuck in their old ways, that old I suppose board mentality, that old male dominated boardroom and which was something that had to change there. Jobs for mates. And you see the same board members in all different companies all around the cities. And it's just like, wow, this is unbelievable. But I think that is slowly starting to change now. And you're getting a lot of younger leaders now. I've seen a lot of board members that are now in their 30s. And they're very good. I think a lot of people are maybe skeptical, go, how can somebody who's 35, be a chairman of a board? And I've got a friend who's a senior managing director in Sydney at a giant firm, and he's only a young bloke, and he's killing it, just a great attitude and not scared to have great people around him. And that's the difference. Yeah.
That's honestly so great. I can make such a good comparison into the work that I do, with, private coaching and people that I work with in strength. Is like, and I've told people this, it's like, if I'm interviewing a person to work with me, they should be interviewing me at the same time as well. Like, it needs to be a good fit on both ends. And hearing that people are going into the workplace now and they're like prepared, like they're asking for the things that they want from there. Like I think that's such a great thing. So it means that everybody as leaders and coaches, like we got to be on our games to be the best that we can be, if we want to, succeed and get to the top level. So I mean, it's all just growth, in many good ways. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, people need the work, but the work needs the people. It's a double-edged thing, isn't it? It's not just you come and work for us and it's a privilege. Well, without the people, the business doesn't survive.
Yeah.
100%. Any business tomorrow that's a gigantic $1 billion firm, if they upset their people so much tomorrow, and every single person left that role, then that person will go broke overnight. That business will go broke overnight. And this is what people don't realize. Yeah. So you've got to back yourself as well. You've got to be happy, where you're working. If you can love what you do, life's easy. I mean, I'm very fortunate that I love my job, what I do now. I get to meet lots of different people and give off all my years of experience. And I love that. And I love nothing more than seeing somebody turn around and actually being successful. Then that's the whole point of it for me. And like I said, if you can love what you do, you can wake up Monday morning and go into work and really, really love that position. Then like I said, life is very, very easy.
Yeah, ditto, 100%. So Mark, this has been absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you jumping on. If people want to find out more about you, check out the services that you have, what's the best place that we can direct them?
Yeah, my website's just markashbyconsulting.com, nice and simple, Mark with a K. And my email address is mark@markashbyconsulting.com. And they can jump on my website. It's quite a decent site. And have a look at it. I've got a masterclass on there as well they can listen to. And if they want to drop me an email and have a chat, I'd love to talk with them. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for talking to me. I appreciate your time. Listeners, thank you so much. If you want to follow Mark, you know where to do so. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. And you'll also get exclusive access to these Strength Connection Mastery seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait, go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.